straight ally, heterosexual ally, or cisgender ally is a heterosexual and cisgender person who supports equal civil rights, gender equality, and LGBTQ social movements, challenging homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. Not everyone who meets this definition identifies as an ally. I'm Brittany Schweitzer, and this is Calling BS. Okay. All right. I have Brenden here with me from Montreal. Is that correct?
You got it.
Yeah. And he's here to kind of give his insights on different parts of, I guess, being an ally in the LGBTQ community. So, one question I always start off with, Brendan, is what do you identify as?
So I identify as straight and ally to the community, and it's so great to be on, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Now, do you have many friends in the LGBTQ community?
I do actually. Montreal is a very open community. We have our own space in the city where the LGBT community can really come together and join as one group. So yeah, I definitely have a lot of people in the sector, and I also work with a lot of them at work as well.
Oh, amazing. So do you have any stories with anybody as being an ally in the community, like from where you work or just your friends in general? Any stories of them coming out or discrimination?
Yeah, of course. I would say one that comes up to me is I have a friend named Ricardo in one of the companies I used to work at, and he's a huge change maker within the company. I think it goes to show you how much of a difference you can make as one individual. So he started a movement at his company that I used to work at, Price Waterhouse, about creating events for the LGBTQ community where people could
Hmm.
gather and share their experiences and ways that we can come together, whether you're an ally to the community like me, or whether you're someone who's a part of the community. We can join as one and figure out strategies and ways of how do we do business better, right? And I think that's one thing that comes up to everyone listening right now. If you're part of a company that isn't as supportive as a big conglomerate would be, like an IBM or a PwC, try and find other people within the community in your company and band together, because that's what will make the management team in your company realize that this should be a priority, especially with what's happening now with the different movements and
Hmm.
pandemic. I think now, instead of looking at this as a negative, I think we can flip that coin and say this is probably the best time ever to start that movement. So go ahead and start it.
That's amazing. So did he? So he started it within your company, or one of his a company he worked at?
You got it. So that was the company that he was working at. So I used to work there, and I was helping
Okay.
him with some of the events. So what I find interesting about the initiatives that Rick took on was it wasn't just, a happy hour where they talked about different issues. They also had panels, they also had coding challenges on how we can code and create applications and programs are a lot more inclusive to that community as
Hmm.
well, and keeping those constraints in mind when creating products or services. So it's similar to how do we build products for like we don't when we design a product, when we design a software, we don't have that community in mind, right? And that leads to different flaws and gaps in the
Hmm.
product or service. So that's the angle that I think Rick took on, that I think is really important, because we kind of miss that part of the equation sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a where I'm from. I'm in Kentucky in the U.S. and there's a couple organizations that are nonprofits that work to like teach, inclusivity and teach people about that stuff and how to deal with it within the workplace and whatnot. So that's awesome that he helped do that within his own organization because some companies need that. They need people to step up and show them that they need to be more inclusive and teach them how to, sell that way and promote within the company and include everybody.
Absolutely. Like, just to build one, a super easy example that I'm sure your community could relate to is multi-gendered bathrooms, right? Just many organizations today don't have that, and I think that's quite appalling that we don't have those bathrooms in every organization. So that's an example of creating a product or service without designing for the LGBTQ community and having them in mind. So by thinking, well, if someone doesn't identify as male or female, then how can we create a space, or even if in that case, that's more sexual orientation, but it could apply for any type of identity
Oh, yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So those
Mhm.
types of things, I think those are the small changes that lead to a bigger impact, because every time a management executive goes to the bathroom and sees that, I know it's a simple example here, but it conditions that person's mind to think, oh, I need to keep this in mind in the decisions that I make in my everyday life and as a business owner or somebody who's making decisions in my organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I feel like that's happening now within all the movements. Some people just weren't thinking about it, but now things are being brought to light, and it's like, oh, okay, we need to change that and improve it. And once someone makes the change and they're making it aware, everyone will kind of be like, okay, this makes sense. So having an inclusive bathroom, okay, that lets everyone know that they're welcome in any manner. It doesn't matter what you identify as, who you are, it just makes them feel included.
Absolutely. Like, I think one interesting thing we can talk about is this idea of why the movement was so successful in such a short period of time, right? This is something I've always thought about as someone who wants to keep solving as many problems, whether it happens to be equality amongst genders, races, and ethnicities, or whether it's, what I do in public speaking. So for instance, if you think about the movement itself and the legalization of gay marriage specifically, what I find fascinating is how quickly the problem got solved. So if you think about just 30 years ago, that was not a thing, right? You know that very well. But what's
Mhm.
interesting is as soon as one of the states legalized gay marriage in the US, it didn't take that long for all 50 states to legalize it, because the movement just started getting bigger and bigger exponentially, as many people, including myself, who were straight, started realizing that there was a problem and
Mhm.
started aiding that community as well. So I think it's all about leverage as well, and how you can think about who else can we get into this community, including the ones who aren't necessarily LGBTQ, so you can move faster and achieve greater things.
Yeah. Another thing that makes a larger impact, we're seeing it now, is just social media and the media. So, yeah, 30 years ago, marriage wasn't legal and it slowly was happening. So, from your point of view, it seemed faster, but it was just 2015 when they legalized marriage in all 50 states. That was only 5 years ago. That's mind blowing. Because when in my state, that wasn't legal until 5 years ago. Other states, it was legal. So I think banding together on social media, even companies showing their support in all ways, is showing people that the movement, any movement, is powerful as long as you have social media pushing it to advance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think building on that point, when you have that trigger, like that triggering event that leads to the dominoes falling and to the change that we're making, I think that's what leads. So yes, it definitely is unfortunate. I completely agree with you, Brittany, that it took so long for that legalization to occur. But I think what's also great, because I always like looking at the positives, right, is
Yeah.
is how, because that's how we move forward, is just how quickly all of the states legalized together. So if you think about
Mhm.
Massachusetts, which I believe was the first state, but don't quote me on it, which is around 2005, 2006, and then all the way over that span of 10 years, everyone just legalized. So I think it's those types of changes we need to think about. So for example, one easy thing the audience can think about is, how can we band together as a community so that every single organization has multi-gendered bathrooms? So you can look at me and say, Brenden, that's not a big change. But as a single individual, we often get confused and worried about, how can I make a change as one person? And what I always tell them is, make that small action. Because once you have that quick win, so let's say you work at a company right now that doesn't have those multi-gendered bathrooms, and you get a petition together. It takes a couple of months, and you get it done. that leads to what I call momentum. And that momentum gets everyone else in the community excited about doing that. And then we can move on to the next small change and the next one. And then they start to rally up very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever had to defend anybody in the LGBT community within the workplace?
So I've been very fortunate because all of the companies I've worked for in my life, there's never been a situation that has occurred simply because I'm young. So when I entered the
Mhm.
workplace, I was already quite young and there's already large acceptance.
Mhm.
Culture has already pretty much been changed. And I have also worked at very big conglomerate companies like IBM or PwC. So those companies are very proactive. They already had their own communities and their own events when I came on board. It's just what Rick did at PwC is he really added more efforts to what was already being done. So unfortunately for me, I never had to be in that instance because I was lucky that I picked the right companies to work for.
Yeah, that's good. That's one big thing when you also when you're choosing a company is watching what their morals are and values are in a company. And if you see that they're going to be inclusive and they, it has a diverse community, you're in the right company because you want to be somewhere that's going to be forward moving, not backwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what are other ways that we can also support and help the LGBT community? For you, example, as an ally, like what else can we do within the workplace? What's another example beyond the bathroom?
Of course. So some things that come to mind. So I think I'll speak on this from a business perspective and also what my area of expertise is so I can add some specific value here. So I think one is understanding the business case behind the LGBTQ community. So let's think about this from a business perspective. That's what's really going to get management moving from my perspective. So if you think about banks or like we take a Chase Bank or a Bank of America or an RBC in Canada or different companies that are client facing. So let's say you take an IBM or a PwC. The reason in a practical sense why they've adapted to this new change in the culture so quickly is not just because they're supportive of the community, but also because it makes sense business wise. So let's say, for example, I work at a bank and I don't have a director who's a part of the LGBTQ community. So let's say you're a wealthy client and you realize that there's nobody in my company that has someone in that community. You're just going to go to another bank, right?
Mhm.
So what's interesting from a client facing standpoint is we're forced to change. And I think that's a good thing, right? We
Yeah.
have to leverage that. That's a great thing. So what you want to think about first is whenever because we have to understand that the world works on incentives, right? So if we
Mhm.
see someone who isn't agreeing with us, who doesn't believe what we believe, the first thing we need to do is understand why they don't and then shift that perspective to something they want. So let's say there's a company that wants to make more money and they say, well, this is too expensive. We don't have time for these types of events. You can retort with, well, how many clients are you losing because you're not investing in this type of initiative, in this type of impactful work? And then he might, or he or she might say, or however they might say something like, oh, well, I'm not sure how many clients I would lose. But if we show that to them, if we say, look, this is how many people are in your community right now, whether you live in the state of Florida, whether you live in Texas, whether you live in New York, and this is the percentage of people who are customers in that sector that you're currently playing in that are also part of the community, and that's how much revenue you're losing. So then they look at it from a pure business standpoint and say, we're making a fatal mistake here. We need to gather people from the community, make a change, or we're going to go out of business. Right. And I
Mhm.
think that's what the world is turning into. And from a public speaking standpoint, I think what I would say as a general message to everyone within the community is if you want to make a difference in the world, if you want to start a movement, it is almost essential to learn how to communicate effectively. Whether that happens to be a blog, if that's something you're more comfortable with, whether that happens to be a podcast, is what we're doing right now, or just simply going in front of a school, going to a high school, going to a company and presenting to 30 people. The more people that are armed with communication skills within the community, the more effective the change that you'll make in the world will be bigger. So I'm sure the first thing that you'll say is, well, Brenden, not you, but maybe the community. Oh, I don't want to go speak at 1,000 people and speak at these big stages. And that's not at all what I'm pushing. What I'm pushing is the simple example, going back to the bathrooms. When the executive calls you in and says, Brittany, I want you to explain this to me. Why do you think it's so important? Now you can gather all of the information from everyone in your community, practice a very robust, very professional presentation, and come up to him or her and say, hey, look, I'm Brittany. I'm your all star employee, and I think this is an issue with the company we need to fix. If that executive has half a brain, they'll look at your super professional presentation that you've prepared, that you've spoken, that you're very well articulated, and say, Brittany's right, and change will be made faster. But if you can't articulate that change properly, even if it's something small like this, it's going to be harder for us to scale. So remember that public speaking equals scale. If you want to make a difference one on one with somebody, you don't need strong communication skills. But if you want to go from one to one, to one to many, like you're doing with this podcast, Brittany, reaching much more people in the community, now you need to work on your communication skills, because that those little changes is what will lead to the big impact in the end.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, because I mean, so I own my own company, and I only have there's 10 of us, so that's as long as you can articulate what you're saying to, like, even for me, to my employees, they're gonna understand, and they're gonna be like, okay, that that's good. But my other point is, as an owner of a company, which is what I am, and I give my employees, as the owner, all the right to come up to me and say what change also needs to be made. So I might not personally think of something, and it's not that I'm even being, I'm not including people. I just might not think of it myself. But if someone comes to me, like you said, and says, hey, this change needs to be made, I'm like, wow, thank you, first off, to coming and telling me and articulating what you need to say. I think that's a great idea, and then we can make the change. So you're right on. As an owner, I'm completely there with you. As long as, public speaking, when you talk to someone and you explain what you want to be changed, it can go a long way.
I love that, Brittany. I think that's a great perspective that you added there. And I think one other lens we can look at it is from the business owner one as well. So let's assume, like, not you specific, because I know you're a business owner, but you're a business owner in general within the community. The next thing you
Hmm.
can do is ask yourself, within the same sector that I'm playing in, who else who other the based on every other business owner in the room or in that sector, who is more supportive or less supportive, and who are less supportive, and why is that the case? And then you can band together with the people who are supportive as business owners and make a much bigger impact within that space.
Yes. Yeah. So I have a business coach, and so every quarter we actually get together for quarterly planning. And this isn't about LGBTQ; it's actually about millennials. So I was in the CEO circle talking to them, and one of them started kind of bashing millennials. And I'm sitting there like, wow, I'm a millennial. I own a company. I'm very successful. I have
Right.
employees that, they look up to me, and we're making changes in the world as millennials. And he's just going on about how, what are the things that they say about millennials, that they're um
Lazy.
yeah, lazy, that they're entitled, and all this stuff. And I'm just like, man, you're really seeing this the wrong way. It's They want to find a point. Like, they're not trying to work. They want to work to get money, but they also want to work for a purpose. They're not just going to go to work to just get a paycheck. There's a difference. Like, they want to make a difference in the world. And he was like, no, no, like, millennials are this way. And I was literally like, I am a millennial. He goes, but you're different. I'm like, that you're not making your point at all. You're just saying that I'm different just because I'm having this conversation with you. And it's just, again, educating somebody who's in a different generation about topics. So that could have been easily changed to the LGBTQ community. He could have said something about them when in the workplace. And it's just, you got to help people, even somebody that's in a different company, help them understand that what you're saying isn't necessarily correct, and you have your own opinion and perspective, but you need to learn from others to gain, acceptance in your own company. Because if you're sitting there bashing millennials, who's going to be the next generation that even comes in there to work if you don't accept them?
Mhm.
No one. You're going to have a dying company soon. So it's just very interesting. It's not just even within one organization. As a CEO owner of a company, I have to also educate other CEOs and owners to understand like their perspective and how they're coming off to their employees.
Absolutely. And I love the points that you added. I think it leads to a great insight for this discussion, which is too many people take a point of data and generalize it to the whole population. So
Yes, they do.
it's
Gosh.
crazy. So let's say you think like even positive stereotypes. You go, "Oh, the LGBTQ community does this." It's like, how can you generalize for an entire
Right.
community? Makes zero
Mhm.
sense. So I think one insight that could not your audience, I'm sure your audience wouldn't make this type of mistake, but for the people we're trying to educate and inform, there's this great quote that I love from this book called Principles by Ray Dalio that I highly recommend people take a look at. But basically, what he argues is instead of just saying, this is what I believe to be true, this is the truth, the better question we need to ask ourselves is why do we believe it to be true? So let's say we think about gay marriage in the 1990s, that was just not a thing. People thought it was wrong. But instead of saying this is the truth, because it's not the truth, we need to ask ourselves instead, why do we believe that to be true? Can't two people just live the way that they would want to live? What harm is that doing to society? Right? Just not even thinking about it from an emotional perspective, just from a rational one. If two people
Mhm.
from the same gender or however they identify as come together as a union and don't do harm to other people and are just happier, doesn't that just make sense? Right? Just from a rational
Yeah.
perspective. So I think that's what's missing in society is as humans when we grow up in and you know all this but I'm just repeating this for your audience is as we grow up we learn new tendencies we essentially forget to remove those tendencies and challenge the very thing that we believe, and most people aren't willing to do that, like the executive you mentioned. That's what leads to all these problems in the first place.
Yes, exactly. So are you actively supporting the LGBTQ community right now within your workplace, or if there's any like nonprofits that you're doing or anything like that?
Yeah, of course. So the way that I always like to approach it is, and I think the point that I'm driving with my impact is it's always important to do what you believe will add the most value to the community. So for me, what I do is, podcast shows like this to show my support for the community. I attend a lot of events at work, but the big thing that I do for me as an individual is my goal in life is to arm the world's change makers to share their ideas with the world, because I found that there's not that great no great resources on how to speak properly and how to communicate. But for me, change maker is anybody. If you're a 16-year-old girl named Julia who just wants to raise $100 for a favorite charity, or you're someone within the LGBTQ community who says, I want this change to happen, but I'm scared of public speaking. I want to be there for every single person, however they identify as, wherever they live in the world, to give them those resources that most of them probably can't afford because speech coaches are crazy expensive, right? So that's why I wanted to create these resources for
Mhm.
everybody in any community to get better. So I think my little impact in the world is just spending every day always thinking through my content and asking myself constantly, is this helping every single person in the community? Am I excluding anyone from this type of conversation or information? And how do I create a plethora of knowledge so it doesn't really matter what age, what however you identify as, who you are, where you are in the world, that you can take advantage of the information.
Yeah. And Brendan, if you want to plug in your YouTube or your podcast, so if anybody wants to find you and learn more about public speaking, I mean, I watched one of your YouTube videos and you hit great key points on there. So I think it'd be great to let other people hear what your handle is and
Yeah,
see
for
what else
sure.
you have to say.
No, absolutely. And I always want to point out when I'm on a show, I'm not famous like Brittany or anything, so you can totally message me on Instagram. I'm at Max Talk. I answer all my DMs, so you can just message me over there. And if you're interested in looking at the videos as well, they're all free. I don't have a paywall or anything. It's at Master Talk in one word. So if you have any feedback for me, feel free to send me a message on Instagram. I'm always happy to chat.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Brendan, for being on here. I loved hearing your insight and hearing from an ally's point of view on different things that we can do within the workplace and in the community. I think it's a great perspective that everyone needs to hear and feel the support, and not just the community itself, but to know that there's allies out there that are supporting us.
Of course, it's been my pleasure and an honor to be on the show. Thanks for having me, Brittany.
Thank you so much.